I'm glad to extend to you a very warm welcome on behalf of the College of Liberal Arts. And I'm grateful to the TLC, with Tom Garza, to Carl, with Carl Blight, and to European Studies, with Doug Beal and their respective staff for putting together this conference workshop where we discuss oral assessment as an ongoing process. I'm actually very glad to be here because I'm a strong believer in assessment. I think assessment is power, and done correctly, it empowers us as educators, it empowers us as administrators, and it empowers our students. And there are many ways to articulate how and why. I will also, only mention that about a year and a half ago, following two sections of intensive Hebrew that I taught that included massive testing, not only OPI, but also listening comprehension and reading comprehension that were developed by the Middle East National Middle East Language Resource Center. I ran a little questionnaire, and it was amazing to see what, first of all, the challenging class, come on in, and then the tests themselves did for the students' confidence and sense of achievement. This is definitely something to talk about. Beyond that, I'm particularly interested in the focus on making oral assessment relevant, and I emphasize here the relevant. Institutions of higher learning recently have focused more and more on globalization and internationalization, central to which are the agility in movement between places and cultures, and then a whole set of attitudinal attributes, such as openness, awareness, sensitivity, and the readiness to battle cultural barriers, the foreign language among them. Language now is a cultural barrier. It's something that we need to fight. So if you don't focus on multiple identities, and what Chantal Warner was here a couple of weeks ago identified as the sublime messiness of students' international and intercultural lives, you run the risk of being irrelevant in today's discourse on foreign language learning. If you speak about communicative competence and skill sets, you will probably find yourself being criticized as being parochial and outdated. That's the tone of the conversation today. So for me, there's something utterly refreshing in a group of practitioners getting together and arguing for their relevance. From my standpoint as an administrator, you're engaging in a discussion that is of the utmost importance at this point in time. And in that context, I would like to refer to our colleague Katie Ahrens from Germanic, who in her critique of the 2007 MLA report, which indeed I believe introduced sublime messiness into our field, entered the note on accountability and on the need for theory-informed research on goals and outcomes. And she writes, it's a 2012 article, professionals and the profession to which they belong will today be judged and funded by their ability to advocate for what they do in terms that are intelligible to other disciplines, and to back up their commitment to performance and advocacy with hard data on how these activities can be taught to students, on how they serve professionally necessary goals, and on what this teaching achieves in terms of measurable outcomes for the hours of instruction and tuition dollars invested in them. So the OPI and similar instruments are set to do exactly that, and in that, your goal and the goal of the administration are one and the same. It's excellence in teaching, great ambition in teaching, and measurable outcomes. So I regret that I cannot stay with you beyond the morning, because I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation. But again, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming and wish you a very fruitful day. Thank you.
Maybe I planned to because we are a relatively small circle, but I hope that's in everybody's interest. What I will do today is that I will talk a little bit about, I took the title of this meeting very literal, Beyond the OPI, because I will talk a little bit from my personal standpoint about what the OPI meant to me, for my teaching, for my research, and for my language program direction. So I'm an assistant professor in Germanic studies here at UT Austin. I came here in 2008. My research is in second language studies, mostly in literacy and in curriculum development. So I'm not an expert on oral proficiency assessment per se, but of course this is something that's very important to us. But it's also something that inspired my professional career in many ways. 10 years ago, I didn't know what OPI was. I thought, OPI, what is that? OP. It could be German slang name for grandpa. OP. So it didn't really mean anything for me 10 years ago. And now I'm standing here talking about the OPI. Again, I'm not an expert on it, but let me tell you a little bit my personal encounter of the oral proficiency interview. When I was in grad school, my cohort and the entire grad students who were in foreign languages and foreign literatures at my institution was actually required to go through OPI training. A lot of my peers didn't really like it so much because if you write a dissertation on the impact of Goethe on Heidegger's thought, you don't really think that actual OPI training is really important for you. But this was part of the Stanford Language Center. They required everybody to do OPI training for reasons that I will touch in the third part of my talk when I talk about language program direction. Okay, almost done with my introduction. A few things. I think that what Esther said in the introduction was really, really powerful and very, very important. Assessment is your friend if you know how to assess and if you know the lingo to assess, because sometimes the call for assessment that comes from higher administration down into language programs and departments is sometimes these people who ask you to provide data and to deliver assessment don't really know themselves so much about it. So you can develop it yourself and you can use that as a strength. So if you know something about it, chances are that you already know a little bit more than some people know about it who ask you to provide assessment. So it can very, very much work in your favor if you know the lingo, if you know some basic principles, because you don't think about it, you might not see yourself like that, but you might already know a little bit more than some people who ask you to deliver data. So let me. Yes, this is basically my introduction. Let me talk a little bit about the role of oral proficiency interviewing in teaching. One of the things, there are basically two things if you do the actual OPI training which is really hammered into you. Two skills. The one skill is to elicit a rateable sample, and the other thing is then to, from this sample, from this student utterances, to decide on which level this student is. So if you go through OPI training, one of the most important factors is the elicitation techniques. So these are possibilities that you can, where you can have a conversation with your students, or you interact with students, or students interact among each other, and they provide as much language as possible. You all know that from classrooms, especially when you were a beginning teacher. One of the biggest problems that my graduate students come to me when they ask me for advice is my students don't speak. Yeah. So that's an important concern, and that's one of the difficult things as a teacher. I think as a beginning teacher to get your students to teach. When I had my first teaching job in England, I always asked my supervisor. I was 22 and teaching at a high school. I was kind of an apprenticeship teacher. I asked my supervisor, "Oh, what can I do on Wednesday with the class?" And he was just like, "Oh yeah, just make them speak." And I was like, "Yes." I was of course mightily frustrated by that because I only now realized that he kind of delegated a much harder task to me as a beginning teacher, where he was just covering the textbook and doing the serious stuff. I was supposed to make them speak. So this is very important. My students come to me all the time and ask me what can I do to make students speak. And here I think a lot of strategies that come from the oral proficiency interview work quite nicely. And I have a couple of them here. Yes, my students don't. There's actually an interesting article by these two colleagues. It came out in 2008 in the Model Language Journal, and it basically says that in advanced, so the data was collected in advanced Spanish literature classes, and it was 95% of the ratio between student talk and teacher talk was teacher talk. So a lot of even experienced teachers don't see the need or don't see the necessity to have their students talk. Although we know for 25 years, for 30 years, Stephen Krashen still believed that if we just provide comprehensible input, that could be enough, but that was corrected in the mid-80s already by Merrill Swan by the output hypothesis. Students have to produce language in order to learn. So let's see what the OPI principle offer in this department. These are a couple of things that are very familiar to you. But the great thing is if you go through OPI training for 3 days, these things are again and again hammered into you. Because you sit there and do these OPI trainings and you have a trainer who tells you every time you miss an opportunity to provide, to elicit more language from the student. And one of these things are just yes and no questions versus W questions. So you as experienced teachers know that, but this is something that during a pre-service or in-service teacher workshops I have to do with my grad students a lot. That there are questions that open up discourses, and then there are questions that close discourses. There are questions that provide almost paragraph-length responses, and on the other hand, you have questions that would be satisfactorily, communicatively answered with one-way questions. So one of the examples here would be do you like living in Austin? Yes. No. So that's a very, 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 very simple question. But then you could think about W question. When did you move to Austin? Why did you move to Austin? So that's there. There we are in the second thing. If you have a question like a simple W question, you still could be very satisfied with a short, small chunk of language that's delivered to you. However, why is a question that opens discourse. Why is something that requires a longer answer. I mean, little children at a certain age ask always why. Not because they want to know, but they realize that if they throw that sound image at you, why, these big people, adults, start talking. Blah, 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 blah. So why elicit? And you can use that with your students. So even if the student the questions are sometimes slightly silly, but following up a yes/no question or a W question of that lower category with a Y question gives your students the chance not to answer with a word or with a small chunk, but in a sentence level or with a discourse level kind of response. Okay, they have to give a reason. And then there's another thing, I call it always the Terry Gross technique. Fresh air, Terry Gross, does that ring a bell? She always asks, tell me more about. And then if she interviews somebody, just like, and somebody gives her like an answer that's okay, but she wants to dig deeper. So it's tell me more about. Okay, so you can do that in your OPIs. You can do that with your students when you're not satisfied. Tell me more about. And then there are two things that are very interesting, and I will come in my second part of the talk a little bit to the discourse principles behind the OPI, and it's sentence level and word level. Intermediate level speech, according to OPI or actual definitions, is characteristic through sentence level use of language. And for sentence level use of language, comparisons are very good. So again, if you're within this topic, where do you live, residence or something like that, then you can ask. If you're confronted with an intermediate learner, you can really push this intermediate learner to a sentence level, and then you can say something like that. Oh, you used to live in Lubbock, and now you live in Austin. Why do you prefer living in Austin than in Lubbock? And then people have to compare two things. Okay, so that pushes them even beyond the sentence level into something like a paragraph level. However, if you have a novice learner in front of you and you want to solidify the novice learner before pushing the novice learner immediately into an area where he or she cannot really operate, you can work quite nicely with lists, and then you work on the word level. And you can say, oh, I've never been to Lubbock. What could I do in Lubbock if I would go there next week? And then the student can say, okay, swimming pool, movie theater, and all these other things that I don't know what one can do in Lubbock. I've never been there. So, but you see that there is a list. So this is something that on a relatively beginning level, people can master. You don't even need syntax for providing an answer here. You only need a range of vocabulary, and you need the comprehension that you understand the question that you're confronted with. But that's much easier, and than to compare on the sentence level. That's something that only intermediate learners can really master. Okay, let's have an example. I do it in ESL. I won't do it in German because otherwise. Okay. So one of the things you could do, of course, here is think about how does our knowledge about sentence or word level could inform our teaching in a communicative classroom. So we're now beyond the OPI. We're not in an assessment scenario. We're just in this classroom. And this is a typical example that ESL teachers probably use every day in classrooms in this country. You and your friend go on a road trip to Yellowstone, make a shopping list with everything that you need. So what do you need, Michael? Titanbus.
Water bottle.
Okay.
Reindeer.
Okay. So now more. Imagine. Mosquitoes everywhere. Huh? Okay. Good. Okay, imagine a big bear will come and you have to defend yourself. Shotgun. Okay, so you see the principle, but you see that this was a very poor demonstration of teaching because I did most of the talking. I talked about the mosquitoes and the bears. I did some acting. You were all mightily entertained by it. I appreciate that, but I heard only 5 words while I was providing probably between 50 and 70 words or so. Another way you can use, that doesn't mean that this is a bad example, but another way you can use that is engaging your class through group work about this. So we won't do it because we don't have enough time, and we won't go to Yellowstone today, but if I would do it in a class, I would post this problem to students. Oh yeah, you have a camping trip coming up. And then I would say for 2 minutes, go down in groups, start working on a list. Okay, students would work on the list. And then I would, only then after students had this one-on-one conversation, where there was a lot of talking going on, I would start perhaps having this teacher-centered conversation. Another thing that I do with more complex topics in order to jumpstart, I mean, I'm digressing now a little bit, but in order to jumpstart this typical teacher-student, teacher-student, teacher-student ping-pong, is that almost every time I have this conversation with the entire class, I set up the class, I prepare the students by a short, sometimes very spontaneously, often it's nothing that I have formally planned in a lesson plan, but I say, okay, for 2 minutes, sit down, reflect on this question. What is the status of national pride in Germany compared to in the United States? Second year, I think we talk about that a lot. But then students can sort their ideas in a partner work. They speak more, but I have also the possibility then to pick on, not to pick on a student, but because otherwise, if you have this ping pong match, you always play ping pong with the 2 or 3 most active students. But if students have the possibility to rehearse the answer before, I can actually pick somebody who never says something like that. What about you in the back row there? Yes? And then they can participate and they don't feel so intimidated. What I actually also do, I'm not a 100%, I'm not even a 90% only in the target language person. I think there's a strategic idea about when we can allow first language interaction. And I sometimes, with a very complex group work of that nature, that example that I gave you, second year, discuss the differences between national pride in the United States and in Germany. I say, okay, you can discuss 2 minutes in German, in English, in your L1, and then you switch into German, and then we talk about it together. The rationale here is that I want to give the students an opportunity to express, first of all, to organize themselves as a group, but also to toss out some idea, to brainstorm, to take some of the cognitive load from this task by providing them with an opportunity for a minute or so to speak in their native language, and then to continue this conversation in the second language, and then to have this class conversation. Okay, that's what I mean with engaging students through group work and writing activities, really in order to set them up for this teaching format. Okay, and then the last thing, which I think was really most important for me, through going through OPI training and rethinking my teaching through that, is the functionality versus accuracy divide that you really have to think about in the beginning and intermediate level classroom, mostly about functionality, and that accuracy gets more important as students progress through the program, but that in beginning and intermediate levels, accuracy is really only something that we should very, very much care for if inaccuracies mean that they are communicative problems. So, in other words, there's a beautiful, the OPI ACTFL trainers, on the first day they always explain a couple of the principles and philosophies behind it, and they have one of those graphs, which is a tree, and they say the trunk, that's functionality, that's what you need to communicate. In German, the example in German would be adjective endings. You can be fully functional without really having control over your adjective endings. It's very, very hard to think about a wrong adjective ending that then would also interfere negatively with the meaning that you are that you're giving. So they think about the trunk as the functionality, the stuff that you need in order to communicate in the language, and the leaves on the tree, this is the accuracy. So that's kind of their image that they use. It's a little bit cheesy, but I find it helpful because a tree without leaves is maybe, it's not great, but it's still a tree. But just the leaves like down there without the trunk and anything doesn't help us at all. So it's really about what people can do with the language, and not so much what people would know about the language. So, good. Let me switch gears now. I have to see where I'm in my script. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is what how the OPI training, etc., and my engagement with that changed my my idea about research. I'm really more a literacy researcher, as I said in the beginning. So OPI training for me was never something that I did to develop as a teacher. But I was not very. I didn't see at first the impact that it would have on my life as a researcher, and this came actually only much later. It was not that I was sitting there and then I started thinking, oh, this is interesting for me as a researcher. This came years later that I saw the power of OPI training that would give you as a researcher, regardless in which kind of mode of communication you work as a second language expert. And it comes really down to the insight that assessment is possible. That was for me the thing. If you think about spoken conversation, everybody who does or did some conversational analysis, if you have a transcript of a conversation, you see that it's extremely messy. We'll use this word again because I think it's a very good description, not only about the cultural dynamics of our students today, but it's simply language is a messy thing. If you think about spoken language, it's so unsystematic. If you would have I'm already not looking forward to looking at myself at this video camera or when it's posted someday, because it's just like it's speech of that nature is full of interrupted sentences, uncompleted sentences. It's agrammatical if we take a traditional standard of language and measure that. And that's what we used to do in language classrooms. We think about the grammar translation classroom was only about written language was the standard. So in a communicative classroom where spoken language is the predominant medium that's at stake, I thought when I was asked to go into OPI training, I said yes, I will do it because I think it's a good experience for me. But I'm very skeptic about it. I'm still a little bit skeptic about some issues. Don't get me wrong. But it was for me very good to see that there is a way where you can set up a system that you have a robust system of assessment that, for example, can provide amazing comparisons. If you have a learner who was tested in 1997 in Serbo-Croatian OPI on the phone and it's intermediate low, you can say that in many, many ways this learner is very comparable to the 2003 learner who was tested at the Foreign Language Institute in a one-on-one testing situation, and the target language was Thai. Yeah, I mean, I think this is amazing. This is quite amazing. And one of the things, what makes that possible, is that the OPI actual assessment is not so much based on situation-based assessment. It's really discourse-based assessment. These are my terms, and I will explain them a little bit more in detail. Let me see. Do I have explanations on the next slide? I come to that. I will just talk about the difference. The CEF is the Common European Framework. It's an assessment battery that was developed by the Council of Europe. I think they published it in 2001, and they revised something about it. So it came 10, 15 years after the ACTFL. And ACTFL was, as you all know from the previous workshop, something that was inspired by the assessment developed in the U.S. government in Washington, starting in the 1950s. So the Common European Framework works very much on situations and on can-do propositions. If you have certain levels are marked by if a student can complete linguistically certain real-life tasks, can reserve a hotel room, can order a meal, can call a taxi, can explain his doctor that he or she has a headache or something like that. These are the can-do propositions, and I think they're somehow problematic because they're very cultural bound. So maybe my Serbo-Croatian student and the Thai student that I was talking about, maybe they have a very different cultural background, or they have to think themselves in a very different cultural situation, where maybe calling a taxi or telling your doctor that you have a headache is something that's not necessarily part of a let's say intermediate low register. Yeah. So actually, there's something slightly smarter, or the OPI, and that is a discourse-based assessment. So here, it's not necessarily, you look also as communicative situations, but when people respond in these situations, we look more how people respond, and not if people successfully, yes or no, can deliver that. And I will give you 3 examples from the, not concrete examples, just simply from the way these levels are described. The novice is formulaic language, yeah? How are you? Fine, blah, blah, blah. Huh? So this, how are you is not something that we think about a sentence, it's something that is as a chunk, formulaic language. And it's on the word level discourse. Again, what can I do in Lubbock? Okay, swimming pool, movie theater, what else? I don't know. Okay, so, this is described officially in the actual lingo by the use of isolated words and phrases that have been encountered, memorized, and recalled. So this doesn't really say about any situations, ordering food in a restaurant. I think I could order food in a restaurant in Italy, although I don't know Italian. I just, yeah? So that doesn't really, probably I'm word level discourse capable in Italian, but that's kind of, but that's more a discourse marker. It's just like, and I think it's very important for us to think about what do we assess here? Like, if somebody is able to master a situation, or if somebody is able, or what kind of language people use in order to master that situation. So the next one, and this will look familiar because I talked already about intermediate learners. It's not formulaic language, it's language. It's a learner that creates with language. Creates with language doesn't mean any artistic here. It's just like, it means simply that it's a learner who is confronted with unfamiliar situations and can put language together and utter sentences or phrases that he or she has never encountered before, but create in that sense. It's a sentence level speak. And these are more or less the quotations that show that. And it's, I think, a very, very nice way to differentiate different linguistic levels. Versus, oh, this is a learner who can only call a taxi, but this is a learner who can call a taxi and order a meal at a restaurant. So you see that I'm not super excited about the European framework, but that's kind of, other people might have other opinions here. And then let's look at advanced learners. Here, think about what I said before about the sentence level. Sentences are still kind of relatively discrete units, if you think about it. And even a chain of a sentence is not necessarily a paragraph, but an advanced learner is able to provide extended discourse, narration and description, and major time frames, past, present, and future. That, of course, also affects, again, your elicitation techniques. A good past tense narration question is, oh, you came to Austin 2 years ago. Do you remember the first day that you were here? What did you do? And then students have to use, you force students into a past narration. And there you can see an advanced learner who might break down, who said, oh, my first day in Austin, I go to the movie theater. And then on my first day in Austin, 2 years ago, I eat lunch. Yeah? You see, just like that, the that the grammar is not keeping up with the intended utterance. Yeah. Okay. And same with the other. So, anyways, this was a very, very good insight for me. Again, I'm coming back to the OPI as a researcher and how to assess language. And as a literacy researcher, I'm of course always confronted with, okay, how do I assess this piece of writing vis-a-vis what other people do? And for me, it's very important here to look at discourse markers, and not simply just like, oh, did I like what the student wrote? Oh, are the ideas well? Yes, of course, that's another category, and it's important that students also generate good ideas. But if you're really interested in, if you're interested to separate that from the language, you have to look at the discourse. So let me see. Yeah, I have one last remark here. It's kind of a mini paragraph that I was struck by inspiration last night. So assessment of language abilities based on actual OPI principles does not only ask what the learner does or is capable to do, but in addition how the learner realizes these communicative functions. And what kind of choices she is capable to make as she uses the language. Yeah. So if you are the further up you are on the ladder, the wider your repertoire is, and then you have choices, stylistic choices also. Yeah. Therefore, we consider the kind of discourse she generates as a result of these choices within the communicative range or with the communicative possibilities, and what kind of generic markers are featured in this discourse. And these generic markers are very, it sounds now very, very much like lingo, but think about generic markers of the text if you think about word, sentence, discourse level. It's very clear that there are different things that come up. So you need to be aware of these markers. You have to notice them in order to make the assessment. And you basically count, not consciously, but you take notice and you take, you see how many, you see what kind of genre is unfolding in front of you. And that gives you the possibility to objectify your assessment. And that gives you the possibility, again, to compare the 1997 phone OPI interview with the Serbo-Croatian learner with the 2007 face-to-face interview with the learner of Thai. So I think that is the reason why it works. And that is something what, for me, was transformational in my way how I saw myself as a second language researcher. That something that I previously understood as something that's unaccessible is indeed accessible. Are there weaknesses in the system? Obviously, yes. I'm not talking about those today. Maybe we have OPI 3 at some point, and then I can put on my criticality hat. So, last thing, the role of the OPI in program direction. As I said, I'm running the German program here. In an ideal world, I would sit on $1 million, and I could pay all my instructors and grad students to go through that training, to send them 4 days to Washington D.C. or wherever, or have a trainer flying in and providing them with the same experience I had. I did that 3 times at Stanford, so because it's always good to have a refresher. The first time I did an ESL because we didn't have enough German folks that it made sense to fly somebody in, and the second and the third time I had a German trainer there. I never did the certification because for me I always said I'm the literacy researcher, I don't need the certification. Of course I regret it, but on the other hand the training was for me more important than like the certificate. Although, I mean, just if I would go 10 years back, I would probably do now the certification as well because I would have more anxiety about finding a job and all these things. I didn't think about these things back then. Okay, so why would I spend a lot of money if I had it to have all my instructors go through OPI training? Because of this impact on teaching. It's the primarily reason. Because of the things that I told you in the first part of the presentation, how it affected my teaching, I would like my instructors and then the undergraduates benefit from that. Okay, another thing why I would like it, and that's something at Stanford, basically we all did it because the placement of incoming freshmen and Stanford students come, there are a lot of students who come in with all varieties of linguistic skills. And often they are not traditional learners who said, oh yeah, I was 2 years in high school and that's where I learned German. It's just like, oh yes, my dad was an ambassador and I lived in Kuwait City and in Zurich and in Paris, and now I'm here, or something like that. And people pick up all sorts of weird linguistic skills on that trajectory. So, so it was very, very good to have an OPI as part of the placement. And of course, if you have hundreds and hundreds of incoming freshmen who have to be placed, you need a whole corps of people who maybe are not certified but have had some OPI training. So one of the things that I would like to do if I had all that money to pay everybody would be exit testing for program development. Not necessarily, I'm not even thinking at this point about the language requirement. I'm just thinking about collecting numbers and collecting data about how the program would work. And but that's not possible at this point. However, if we think about something that there's serious conversations about, to move from a C to a proficiency requirement, this whole group of people who are able to test languages, and not in German, but also in the other 32 languages that are taught on this campus, that would be of course, that would put us in a situation where we would have national leadership in the way how we think about the management of a language requirement. But this costs a lot of money. This is the ideal world. The real world is now that my teacher training with my graduate students includes a lot of the OPI-inspired techniques. So it's kind of the second-hand version of it. So it's not as intensive. I mean, these OPI trainers, everybody who had exposure to them, they are just like absolutely the best of the best. OPI has a role in placement for me, or for my program, but not with all the students, but these are the students with what I quote-unquote call an unusual learner biography. So when people do the placement test, the departmental placement test on the first page, they always have to fill out a little bit about themselves, where they learn German, and da-da-da-da-da. And if there's something unusual, if it's not, okay, I went to high school in Babok and I took German with Frau Schmidt for 3 years, and so on, and then we can see what's going on in the test. We can place that person relatively reliable based on our placement test. But again, if somebody says, yeah, well, my father was in the military, and my parents, we lived in Germany for the first 7 years of my life, but we lived on a U.S. military base. I didn't go to a German high school, or German elementary school, but but I had German friends and da 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 da. If there's something like that going on, I send a student often an email and say, well, see me in my office hour, so that we can have a quick oral proficiency interview, and then I can use that and the written account as a more holistic basis to see, oh, this is where the student would be better off. It's very difficult to place students who have a different track in the language learning than oh yeah, I went to high school for the last 3 years. Okay, and now we come to the exit testing, and also the language requirement. So again, I can't test everybody who exits the program myself, but I can look at the benchmarks, which is basically the tests that people do in order to finish the language requirement with a grade C or higher, and calibrate them among other factors, according to OPI-inspired categories. I can, for example, in the written work that students, I revamped the second year of our program very much in the last 2 years, and it's really moving beyond a communicative classroom into a more communicative classroom which has a lot of literacy components, critical reading, critical writing, and so on. And I can look at writing pieces and the stuff that students are required to write at the end of the second year through these categories where I see, oh, is there extended discourse? Is this still somebody who writes on a word level after 2 years or 3 semesters of intensive German instruction? If that's the case, that's a good indicator for me that there are problems with the program. But if the majority of learners at that level write on the sentence level and some push into this discourse territory, then of course I can think that things work out better. So I look at what students produce in the context of their exams, really through the OPI lens. The thing is just, and I'm thinking about, I mean, just like I said to you, in a perfect world, I would have all the money to make it a proficiency requirement. But if I had that money, I would probably also think again beyond the OPI. Because what I just told you about my second year, it's communicative language instruction, obviously, but there's also a literacy component to it. And if I would just think about the entire language program at the capstone experience, there's quote unquote just an oral proficiency interview. There would be a strong disjunct between the curriculum and something that my department and I value very much as a second year curriculum, where we go beyond the communicative approach and develop explicitly literary reading skills and build up systematic writing skills. But if we would then just assess the language program through an OPI, we would of course do a lot of things. We would have a disjunct between our assessment instrument and our program. So in the end of the day, I say, okay, we're living in the real world. That's maybe sometimes better than in the perfect world. So the assessment and instruments and the way I think about the program development, I can think a little bit more freely. I can develop my own assessment according to OPI standards, according to these principles, but I can also look at other things that attribute more the messy nature of language learning and literacy development that come then more from other sources, like the 2007 MLA report that Esther also mentioned. So we have to patchwork that together, but sometimes it's perhaps better and it's more creative than just using this one-size-fits-all approach. Okay, this is it. Thank you very much. Questions?
We'll take a quick break and maybe resume at 11:15.
Let's see.
We can be back on.
Question.
Oh, we're going to do questions now. I'm sorry.
Right.
Oh, I don't know.
Yes, let's do
You're the
questions.
boss.
That would, I know you need to.
But I think I went over time already.
No,
Is that
that's
possible?
fine. Doesn't even have questions.
Yeah, maybe nobody has a question. That would be.
Can you go back and remember what reason was given to you for why all of you need to take the training?
And the main reason was basically to make sure that at the Stanford Language Center, this is the way how the program is assessed. This is the way how incoming students are placed through an OPI. It's not a face-to-face OPI. It's a SOPI. It's a simulated OPI. So it's not one-to-one placement, but it is students respond to a computer program or to a tape program. Their responses are recorded, and we, as the graduate students, after having gone through the training, could listen to these samples and say, okay, this is an immediate low learner, so he will be in this class. So that was the main reason. However, the director of the Language Center was smart enough to tell us also that this is quite relevant for our professional development. And I think this is one of the things when again, if I would ever have the money to do these kind of things, this is how I would sell it to my grad students. Because it wouldn't hard for me to sell it because I firmly believe in it, that it had a great impact on my teaching. So, but it is something that is And it's not popular among graduate students in my particular graduate school environment, because most of them were literature and cultural studies students. And so we had to come in 2 weekends in a row, Saturday and Sunday, and sit like in dark rooms without windows, smaller than this one, for 2 entire days. And again, somebody who's more thinking about his dissertation on Heidegger's reception of Goethe might not think that it's kind of intellectually engaging to think about to discuss you don't even discuss the difference between intermediate low and intermediate mid. You accept these differences. So one of the things why OPI testing works again is that there is not so much room for you as a tester or for a teacher to think, yeah, this is intermediate mid, but I so much feel that it should be intermediate high. So this doesn't work. So it's just like, if it's intermediate mid, it's intermediate mid because you have these level descriptors and you have these kind of particular behavior between the levels that you saw in the past 20 minutes. And then it's not a matter of critical thinking or discussion. It's just, you just do it. So
I heard Elizabeth Brenner a couple of years ago talk about why this is so. And she argued as an administrator. And she said that this is her way to preserve the integrity of the language programs, because she can come with results and say, you see what we're doing? This is, I have results to show. And that was so important to her. And it is still important. It doesn't matter whether it's the OPI or any other instrument. If you look at the webpage of the Language Center at Stanford, each and every language defines very clearly what proficiency levels and what skills it is looking for. If you go through sites of AU universities or any kind of peer group that you would like to see for DT, very few define it in terms of proficiency.
yeah.
At UT, we tried for a good couple of years to enter the word proficiency into the language requirement, and this is a political issue. And people are really opposed to that for a variety of reasons. But the Stanford model, that allowed her, the fact that she had everybody trained, that allowed her to test a large number of students.
And I think
that's an investment, it's a huge investment, but it's a good one.
Oh, absolutely. And if I may add to that, I think one of the things that makes that situation also unique is the way how the Language Center directly reports, not to the dean of the college, but to the president of the university, or to the provost, but into these structures. So, because I mean, I was there for 6 years, and I saw also the amount of because assessment is something that a lot of people feel as threatened. And if you think about the national language departments, and if you have then an entity that comes there and says, well, we want to do this, of course the gut reaction of the average chair of the department is no way. And I think that also helped that situation in terms of the way the structures are set up, so that you can actually gather this data. I think the reason why at a lot of AAU peer institutions you don't find the data, I think it's not even collected. I think it's not even collected. Maybe on a sporadic, maybe in some departments here or there's something similar going on, but it's not. I think there's no institution in this country which just has this kind of vast data collection across all the sections. And of course, that is something that individual units perceive as threatening.
I have a quick question about the practicality of calibration, and if you could tell me what you did to calibrate these benchmarks across your program. If you have time for that.
No. It's just like, maybe that sounds bigger than what I did, but as part of revamping the language program, and I revamped the second year into the literacy mode, and the first year we had a Czech textbook change recently. We're still having it. This is also something that doesn't happen overnight. I was very seriously looking, for example, at the writing assignments within the tests, and was looking at, okay, what is expected from students in this prompt? If you have a writing assignment in a first year language class, that is, part of the, which is, oh, what did you do last summer? That's a problematic writing task for a first year student because it's past narration. That's an advanced level marker. It doesn't mean that students should be encouraged occasionally to hit the ceiling, yeah. But if I saw these inconsistencies, I was redesigning these tests in a way that first year tests or first semester tests were checking or were eliciting language on the word level and formulaic. Second semester, it was creative, but very much confined on the sentence level. And in the second year, I was also still looking at the sentence level mostly because we're solidly in the intermediate there. But I was also giving students through the tests opportunities to show off their abilities if they were actually able to kind of break the ceiling towards advanced levels. So I was looking through these tests again, and was making changes where I saw, okay, there's an inconsistency with what we think about what, let's say, novice or intermediate or advanced level language should look like.
So you did it alone, and then kind of the knowledge you gained, you share with your graduate students who are teaching. You weren't collaborating with colleagues on this calibration, and what do we want for our program?
No. I do a lot with my grad students in that way. So in section meetings, I said, well, let's look at this task. Do you think it's an intermediate level task? Do you think there is a sentence that this task is an elicitation of sentences? Is it does it compare living in Lubbock and in Austin? Or does it just ask, what can you do in Lubbock? If you have in Austin. If you have a second year quiz, and if it ends with one of these short essays, and the question is, what can one do in Austin on a weekend? Then I say, no, that's not an intermediate level task. That's because then it's just like, oh yes, I can go running, I can go swimming, I can go movie theater, I can go I can do. Maybe this may appear to us on the superficial level as like separate sentences, but if it's always I can book, 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 that's a list. Huh? So that's that's what I meant with kind of recalibrating the tests.
Right.
So to make sure that the tests are built in a way that if you earn a C or higher grade at the end of the second year, that you're also solidly in the intermediate range. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Here, I'm just curious. I understand you implemented this in your lower division courses, your language requirement courses. How does that translate into upper division? Do your colleagues buy into this and try to apply it in upper division courses?
Well, first of all, it's only loosely inspired the lower division by the principles. And
right.
the second thing is, I think in my department there is quite a great deal of articulation between as a program between the language program and the upper division. However, it is more. It's more apparent, this continuum in terms of the build-up of critical literacy skills, because these are the skills that are also traditionally more valued in upper level undergraduate instruction for good reasons, because we can't continue for 4 years writing train tickets from Frankfurt to Amsterdam. So we have to go beyond. We have to go beyond a purely communicative mode. Otherwise the yellow boxes come, because they can do the same for maybe not as good as we, but a little bit cheaper. Yeah. So if we don't think about our curricula as something that are integrated over 4 years and that target in terms of intercultural criticality and literacy skills in the second language, where we do something that's university level work. I think that's kind of when we could lose traction. The thing is, if you think about this articulation, it's probably more the other way around. That how I see my second year is something that it prepares students for upper level work better than more of the same. Yeah? So I mean, there's a lot of discussions in the profession about what should we do with the second year. I mean, because in a lot of programs it's basically more of the same. But that's not necessarily having students then in a third year class, which is really more a content-based class. And not all colleagues of us who teach upper division have the inspiration to see it actually still as content-based language instruction that they do at the upper level. And if it's just the Kafka class, then of course a student who has only bought train tickets from Frankfurt to Amsterdam is ill prepared for a language class, for upper division class like that. So I think it's very, very important to see the 4 years basically through the content-based language instruction paradigm, whereas the language instruction, of course, has the front seat in the first year, but where language instruction is always delivered through content, whereas the content gets more and more important as you move up the curriculum, but it's still a language class. And even our colleague with 15 books about Kafka can't pretend that he's sitting in front of a class with students that are native speakers of that language. It has to still be a language class. It has to be a class that explicitly helps students to develop literacy skills in the second language, critical thinking skills, writing skills, and has to treat a classroom as a learning environment and not necessarily as a display of knowledge environment. That's, I think, the problem that often one faces in these four-year curricula where administratively it's often assumed, oh yes, the first 2 years are about language learning, and then we talk about the serious stuff.
Is there an exit exam in the German department? I mean, do you
No.
know? Because it is hard to move an intermediate mid to advanced
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, we don't have an exit exam. I mean, we have a final in the end of the third semester, our 6-12, which is kind of the last class the student does before upper division. So, and I look at these exams very seriously, but it's not an exit exam in a way that it allows, or it's not an exit/entry exam that it would also allow entry. Just like entry into upper division is granted for everybody who has a C or better in the last course of the language requirement, which is 6-12 for my department.
And do you have classes like there are still language classes but are upper division level, like conversation and compositions?
Yeah, we have.
Literature is not, the main focus.
Yeah, no, I think that really, to characterize it as content-based language instruction, where then in the third year, we have a class 331L, these numbers are often ridiculous, which is our conversation and composition class. And I think the class would be in an ideal environment, it would be called Introduction to German Studies for Majors, or for prospective majors, because it's a class where it's very content-driven, and it's 20th century Germany and emphasis on Berlin and all this kind of, it's very social historical emphasis, a lot of literature, visual arts, film, but where the instructors who designed this course have a very conscious commitment to the fact that there's still development of linguistic skills going on in that class. And we have another class which is called 328, and it's called German German grammar, which is which is a class that I'm not super happy with, but I mean, I can't change everything in my department, fortunately. And it's called German grammar, and it's basically a very old school class where there's a very strict focus on form and accuracy. All the leaves that we can ignore in the first 2 years, or largely ignore, are then kind of stuck on the tree. So that's I taught this class in my first year I was here, and the students are actually quite excited about it, because they are the students who want to move on to major, and they some of them also say, yes, this everything goes approach. It's kind of how we call it. It's kind of, but the de-emphasize of explicit instruction of grammar that is characteristic for the first 2 years, because there it works that students have to prepare the grammar at home, and they come in the classroom, and we use the language in the classroom. We don't have long grammar instructions and stuff like that. So, but at some point, then German gets so complicated or nuanced that they have the impression that they really need a class to fix a couple of these things. And maybe there is a place for that class in the curriculum. I don't think that I have all the answers anyway. So.
And that is taught in German?
That depends on the instructor. I think that class, the conversation composition class about Berlin 20th century social history. That's in German.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr.